all members of our community. And I will stop there. Thanks, everyone. I will hand it off to Willie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Willie Burnley. I'm a new member of Union United. I use he, him pronouns, and I live on Winter Hill, probably not that far from Mary Jo. And I'm here today to talk about two really important issues for both of these organizations to advocate for, using the leverage and power that we build as a community. The first of which is making it a priority for these developers to prioritize the procurement of resources from local immigrants and other BIPOC owned businesses, that's Black, Indigenous, or people of color owned businesses. This is an incredibly important issue because it is extremely material. It is tangible equity that we can help supply to members of this community. And as Greg very eloquently laid out before, it is a counterbalance to the very real threatening reality that some of these developers, through their presence alone, enact upon the members of this community by threatening their livelihoods and their residency in Somerville. So for those of you, just be quite clear, who don't know what procurement means or how it works, a very basic definition would be that procurement is the acquiring of goods and services from the commercial businesses via negotiated contracts that are received through bids. So in this case, these developers put out bids to all sorts of businesses to actually perform a lot of the services. That's labor, that's getting goods. And this can be a huge source of income for local businesses. So for those of you who pay attention to issues such as this, you might have noticed that just recently in Boston, there was a report that came out talking about the kind of contracts that were used from 2014 to 2019, and the huge discrepancy in who got those contracts and how it benefited certain parts of Boston over other certain parts. So very specifically, of the almost $200 million that the city of Boston itself spent on these contracts, 2.5% of that went to businesses owned by people of color. 2.5%. Less than 0.5% went to Black-owned businesses. 0.8% went to Latino-owned businesses. And it's not because there just weren't enough of these businesses around to take these contracts. In fact, Black-owned businesses were the largest type of business that could have taken these contracts. And an analysis done showed that they could have easily taken at least 3.6% of those contracts by themselves, which would have been more than the total that all businesses owned by people of color took in Boston. Now, why is this important? It's because the racial wealth gap is very real. And by giving literally hundreds of millions of dollars to certain businesses and starving out others, we're only widening the gaps that already exist in our communities and worsening inequities. So this is an issue that should be pushed on the city of Somerville also, which I would love to see a report about their procurement practices. And that's something that community members obviously can advocate for, but it's also something we should be pushing on private businesses, especially these developers who come to our city, make it look more like Kendall Square, potentially push out our residents or add to the fear of their displacement. This is the tangible material way that they can balance those scales and make sure that people aren't being pushed out, aren't being driven away from jobs, and aren't being shut down. So making it a priority for these developers, as written in a CBA, to prioritize these businesses in their bids is incredibly important to providing real racial equity in a material sense to Somerville residents. Another issue that is quite important today is high-speed internet installation. Now for, I think it's Michelle who's nodding. You know, high-speed internet is a basic need in modern society. It's just a fact of the world that we live in today, especially during COVID. At this point, if people do not have reliable and affordable high-speed internet, it essentially means that they are cut off from ordering groceries online, sometimes making doctor's appointments, their local government, and it's the information that that government puts out. And on a more personal level, just friends and family in the kind of very necessary social, emotional, and psychological interactions that we get from them. So many of those things become exponentially more difficult if we do not have reliable and affordable internet connections. And studies have been done that show there are a huge discrepancy in who does and who does not have this. Particularly immigrants and elderly folks have far less access to this service. And there are, and even for those who do, some pay huge amounts of money for this. For some people, the cost of Wi-Fi is their largest utility, only exceeded by the rent. And there are communities who are fighting to change this. Cambridge, for example, has been pushing for municipal broadband, which would make essentially give a public option on internet to make sure that everyone in the community can have it. And that could be one route that Somerville goes in. But again, even as we make demands on our city and its resources that are our resources, we have to push these private developers who come in and reap the benefits of our community to give back. And that can be done in so many different ways. We could be asking them to lay some of the conduits themselves as they do the massive development in building that they need to create their buildings. It can be providing hotspots for a certain radius around the buildings that they are creating. It could be just allowing certain people, like the community, to come in and have Wi-Fi that's much more open to everybody. There are so many different ways that we can make sure that these developers are providing high-speed internet installation for the neighborhoods that they occupy, but it is a crucial reality that we need to make sure that none of our neighbors are left behind. And for those businesses that have the resources to provide this, we should be demanding it, because if we don't, we're only going to allow the status quo to continue. And that means that there are community members who do not have the basic connection to their neighbors. Thank you. I will pass it to Marielle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Willie. Sweet. And then the last thing we're just going to talk about real quickly is making sure that, so excuse the sirens, I live right behind the ambulance bay. So making sure that